The morning light came slowly, spilling across the wooden desk like a pale promise. I sat there, quiet, hands tracing the edges of the tin box I had carried with me through so many years. It was small, dented at one corner, its paint chipped from decades of careful handling. Yet to me, it had always felt larger than life, heavy with possibility. Every coin that had found its way into this box had been a seed, planted in the hope that someday it would grow into a future I could touch. I opened it now, as I often did when the world outside felt too loud or too fast, and found only emptiness. The clinking of coins that once sang under my fingers was gone, replaced by a hollow silence. I closed my eyes and let the quiet settle around me, as if the room itself were holding its breath. The rain had started softly outside, tapping against the window in a rhythm I remembered from my childhood. Gentle, insistent, like someone knocking on an old memory. I could almost feel the weight of those early mornings when I would wake before the sun, tiptoe past sleeping bodies and count each coin. Each one had a story, a small triumph. The pennies saved from helping neighbors, the folded bills tucked into envelopes with careful handwriting. I remembered the scent of my mother's tea, steaming and fragrant, filling the kitchen as she whispered encouragement about school and the dreams she imagined for me. Those whispers were light and fleeting, but they carried a gravity I did not yet understand. Sometimes I held the box close and imagined the world it might open for me. I imagined walking through gates of colleges I had dreamed about, hearing the echo of laughter in hallways that would someday become familiar. I imagined the day I would finally tell my parents that I was ready to step into that next chapter. Coins converted into tuition, effort transformed into opportunity. And yet, life had a way of shifting quietly beneath the surface, leaving moments like this, empty, still, and unbearably heavy. The walls around me seemed to lean in, holding their own stories. The soft hum of the ceiling fan, the muted colors of morning light through the window, the lingering smell of wet earth carried in from the garden. All of it reminded me of a time when the world was smaller, yet impossibly vast in its potential. I could see my younger self kneeling on the floor, hands trembling with excitement as I placed a coin in the box, whispering to myself, "One day, this will be enough." I traced the scratches and dents of the tin again, remembering the afternoons I spent polishing it, cleaning the dust of days that felt endless and yet too short. Every mark was a memory, a testament to care, to hope, to the quiet, unspoken patience of youth. I could remember the way the sunlight had fallen across the table, casting a warm glow over my small triumphs, over the simple act of saving, of preparing for something I could not yet touch. There was a stillness in the room that demanded reflection. I could feel the tension of what had been lost, yet also the intimacy of remembering. It was not the coins themselves I mourned, but the trust and anticipation they represented. The dreams that had once been mine alone, carefully nurtured, waiting to bloom. And now, the box was silent. I held it for a long moment, turning it in my hands, letting my fingers feel the tiny imperfections, the uneven paint, the history of small victories. In that quiet, I thought about my parents, not as villains, but as people carrying burdens I could not yet measure. I thought about the choices that had been made before I could understand their weight. And though the emptiness of the box stung, I felt a strange tenderness, a recognition of all that had come before this moment. The love, the effort, the small rituals of family life that had shaped me in ways both seen and unseen. The rain tapped against the window again. Steady and soft, each drop a reminder of passing time, of moments that come and go like whispers. I closed the box gently, placed it back on the desk, and allowed the silence to fill me. It was a beginning, in its own quiet way, a first step into a memory that would unfold slowly, layer by layer, carrying with it the fragility of hope, the weight of loss, and the tender pulse of reflection. I lingered there a while longer, hands resting on the wooden surface, letting the light and the sound of rain guide me into the memories waiting just beyond reach. Somewhere in the distance I could hear the faint echo of my own heartbeat, steady and patient, reminding me that even when a box is empty, the life it once held continues to live in memory, shaping the way we see the world. and shaping the quiet strength we carry into every tomorrow. Home was a rhythm I could feel more than see. Even before I fully opened my eyes each morning, I could sense it. The hum of the ceiling fan spinning lazily, the faint scent of rice cooking in the kitchen, the soft scrape of my father's chair against the wooden floor as he settled to read the morning paper. Each sound, each smell, each gentle vibration of the house carried a weight that was both comforting and relentless. A reminder that life continued, quietly, around the small dramas and secret triumphs of childhood. I remember the first time I truly noticed the value of a coin. It was not just a piece of metal. It was a story, a tiny artifact of effort and hope. I had saved diligently, stacking each one inside my tin box, counting and recounting them as if the act of touch could somehow solidify the dream of a future that felt impossibly distant. Coins were clinked together under the table during dinners, brushed under the edge of the tablecloth when I thought no one was looking, folded with care into the corners of envelopes, each stamped with careful handwriting that made even the smallest savings feel sacred. The walls of our home had absorbed all these small movements. I could still hear the echo of my mother humming while washing dishes, her voice light and melodic, carrying a subtle undertone of worry that she would never speak aloud. I could feel the uneven warmth of the sunlight spilling across the floorboards, illuminating the dust motes like tiny sparks of memory. Even the garden outside seemed to hum along with life, the scent of wet soil mingling with the aroma of jasmine and basil, grounding me in a world that was at once ordinary and extraordinary. Family dynamics were complex, layered with love and tension in equal measure. My parents loved fiercely, though not always evenly, and I was acutely aware of the quiet favoritism that often played beneath the surface. My siblings' laughter was brighter, more immediate, drawing eyes and smiles from our parents that I sometimes felt I had to earn twice as hard. I never let it harden me. Instead, I carried it quietly, the weight of comparison shaping a resolve to care more, to save more, to make my small victories count in ways that could not be measured in applause. I spent countless afternoons cataloging my coins, stacking them in neat rows, pressing them into the tin box like tiny bricks, building a future I could touch only in imagination. I remember the soft thud as each coin landed, the metallic resonance echoing faintly through the room. And always, there were notes, crumpled, folded, sometimes smudged. Each one carried a story, a pocket money saved from a neighbor's gratitude, a folded bill hidden in a book after doing chores beyond my age. Those notes were heavier than coins, not in weight, but in meaning. I held them reverently, tracing the inked lines with my fingers, feeling the texture, and imagining how they might someday transform into something larger than myself. Childhood was punctuated by small rituals, simple acts that carried a disproportionate emotional weight. Breakfasts shared around the worn wooden table, the sound of my father's soft chuckle at a joke long forgotten, the way my mother's hand lingered briefly on my shoulder as she passed through the kitchen. These were the moments that seemed to stretch time, that tethered me to the world even when my own dreams felt fragile. Each coin saved, each note folded and tucked into the tin box, became part of that rhythm, an intimate dialogue between effort and hope, between what I could control and what life might take from me. There was an artistry in the way I handled these small objects. Coins were stacked by denomination, envelopes sorted by the day they were earned, tiny folded notes kept in a corner for days until I could place them properly in the box. I treated each one with care, a quiet ritual of acknowledgement, a tactile affirmation that these small actions mattered. And in that care, I learned something fundamental about life. That value is not only in what is earned, but in the attention, reverence, and patience we give to each step of the journey. Yet even amid this intimacy, the shadows of family realities were always present. I began to notice the subtle signs of strain, the quiet sighs in the kitchen, the tightened grip on the steering wheel during errands, the whispered conversations that paused when I entered the room. Parents were flawed, human, trying to balance love, obligation, and survival. I carried these observations silently, understanding them in ways too heavy for my age, even as I continued to place each coin into the tin box as though it were armor against uncertainty. I remember one particular evening, the kind where rain fell softly outside, drumming a steady rhythm on the roof. I sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting coins by size, watching droplets slide down the window pane. My sibling ran past, laughing at some imagined joke, and my parents exchanged a glance that I could almost read without words. In that glance was a mixture of pride, frustration, and fatigue. I looked down at the coins in my hands, feeling both the pride of what I had saved and a vague, unsettled ache of being unseen in ways that mattered. And yet, I kept counting, folding, and stacking, letting the rhythm of my own diligence provide a quiet solace. The tin box became more than a container. It became a confidant, a silent witness to every triumph and every pang of longing. I would whisper to it in the dark, recounting the little victories of the day, imagining a future where my efforts would finally meet the world and find a place of recognition. I could smell the faint residue of the coins, the paper notes, the wooden desk beneath me, and all of it felt infused with a quiet magic, a promise that though life might bend, it would not break the intentions I nurtured so carefully. Even the act of walking through our home carried an emotional cadence. The scrape of my shoes against the floorboards, the hum of the ceiling fan, the clink of coins as I carried them to my room. They were all part of a music that only I seemed to hear. Each gesture, each sound, each fold of paper was a brushstroke painting a memory of love, responsibility, and longing. And every evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows lengthened across the floor, I would sit with my tin box and feel both the weight of what I had accomplished and the fragile ache of hope tethered to the unknown. Looking back now, I can see that those early moments, steeped in the minutiae of home, coins and crumpled notes, were shaping more than a financial future. They were shaping my understanding of life itself. I learned about the quiet gravity of care, about the patience required to nurture dreams that may not bear fruit in the way we expect. I learned that love can be uneven, that family can be complex, and that sometimes the most profound lessons come not from what is given freely, but from what we tend in silence, quietly, persistently, with hope held in trembling hands. The house hummed softly around me as the day closed. The tin box sat at my side, a steadfast companion in a world that seemed vast and unknowable. I could hear the fading rhythm of rain, smell the lingering scent of dinner, and feel the pulse of a home alive with quiet life. And as I rested my hands on the box, I understood something essential, that these small moments, the clink of coins, the rustle of crumpled notes, the scent of home, were themselves treasures, quietly holding me through every disappointment, every joy, every whispered hope that had ever filled a child's heart. The morning began like any other, soft sunlight filtering through the curtains, the distant hum of the street outside blending with the quiet cadence of home. I carried the tin box in my hands, a familiar weight, each coin inside a silent promise I had nurtured for years. There was a rhythm to the day, small, measured, comforting, until the world shifted in the subtlest of ways. The bank smelled of polished wood and faint disinfectant, the air cool against my skin. I traced the steps I had taken so many times before, yet today they felt different, each footfall heavier, each breath slightly restrained. The teller greeted me with polite efficiency, a practiced smile that held no weight of the history I carried in my hands. I approached the counter, heart quietly steady, expecting the ordinary, and instead met the extraordinary silence of absence. My account. The savings, I started, voice barely above a whisper. The words felt strange even as they formed, foreign on my tongue. The teller's hands paused over the keyboard, their eyes flicking to the screen with careful professionalism. "I'm sorry," they said softly, almost hesitantly. "There's nothing there. The account has been emptied, time slowed." I could hear the faint scrape of a chair in the corner, the soft ticking of the wall clock, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The words echoed in my mind, each repetition a little louder than the last. Emptied. Gone. Taken for reasons I had yet to understand. Walking home, the city felt strangely distant. Cars moved past with muted engines. Pedestrians went about their routines. But all of it seemed filtered through a thin layer of shock. I held the tin box close to my chest, as if its metal walls could shield me from the truth I was slowly beginning to absorb. My steps carried me past familiar storefronts, past the park where I had once counted coins under the shade of an old oak, past the bakery whose scent of fresh bread had always anchored mornings. Everything seemed the same, and yet nothing felt the same at all. At home, the explanation came quietly, almost hesitantly. My parents spoke in soft tones, careful and deliberate. "We needed it. For your sister's tuition." The words, so ordinary in delivery, carried a gravity that pressed into the chest, constricting and inevitable. They did not shout, they did not cry. There was only a low, steady acknowledgement of necessity, of choice made, of love weighed unevenly against circumstance. I stood in the room, listening to their voices, hearing the gentle tremor in my mother's sigh, the careful cadence in my father's explanation. The tin box sat in my hands like a hollow heart, empty now, yet still heavy with the history of every coin, every folded note, every small act of hope. I traced the edges with trembling fingers, remembering the mornings of careful saving, the evenings of counting and stacking, the whispered promises I had never fully voiced aloud. The shock was not loud. It was quiet, insidious, unfolding in layers I could not immediately name. It settled in my chest, a weight that pressed downward with each heartbeat. Love, I realized, was not always protective. Sacrifice could come in forms that felt like betrayal. And in the stillness, I began to understand that the life I had imagined, carefully nurtured through coins and notes and quiet diligence, could be rearranged without warning. Even the walls seemed to whisper now, carrying faint echoes of conversations past. I remembered the small remarks, the subtle glances, the half-finished sentences that hinted at decisions made behind closed doors. The house, once a sanctuary of rhythm and warmth, now felt heavy with untold stories. Windows that had once framed sunlight and dust motes now felt like barriers between understanding and reality, each pane a fragile divider between expectation and truth. I wandered through familiar spaces, touching the surfaces I had once found comfort in. The edge of the kitchen counter, smooth and worn, still smelled faintly of spices and cooking. The wooden floor beneath my feet carried the echoes of my own footsteps, yet they felt hollow, distant. Even the tin box resting in my lap seemed to sigh with the memories it held, a silent witness to the quiet unraveling of hope. The day stretched long and measured, punctuated only by the subtle, almost imperceptible sounds of life continuing elsewhere. I traced the corners of rooms, recalling the first coins I had ever saved, the folded bills tucked carefully beneath the lining of the box, the small victories that had once made me feel capable of shaping my own future. And yet, now, those victories felt distant, fragile, almost unreal, like footprints washed away by a gentle tide, leaving only the memory of effort behind. In the quiet of my own room that evening, I sat by the window, listening to the soft patter of rain beginning to fall outside. Each drop mirrored the hollow ache inside me, each ripple against the glass a reminder of what had been taken, of what could not be retrieved. I thought of my sibling, of the tuition that now meant my sacrifices had been redirected, and felt a strange mixture of anger, sorrow, and reluctant understanding. It was love, I realized, but love filtered through the prism of survival, of choice, of imperfect priorities. I traced the edges of the tin box once more, feeling the imprint of every coin, every folded note, every carefully nurtured hope. My hands lingered there, fingers trembling, absorbing the weight of both loss and memory. The walls seemed to hold me in their embrace, carrying the echoes of my quiet disbelief, my silent grief, my internal reckoning. There was no shouting, no dramatics, only the still, profound recognition that life could be both tender and cruel, both generous and selfish all at once. And in that moment, as the rain intensified and the soft light faded from the sky, I understood something essential. The tin box was empty, but it still held me. It still held the careful, quiet diligence that had defined so much of my childhood. It still held the dreams I had nurtured, not erased, only transformed into something subtler, more enduring, a resilience born from understanding, a hope tempered by the lessons of love and loss. The whispers between walls and windows continued, carrying memories of laughter, of clinking coins, of folded notes, of small victories that no one could take away. They were soft, almost imperceptible, but they mattered. They reminded me that even in loss, even in the quiet betrayal of circumstance, there was a narrative that belonged to me, shaped by my own hands, my own heart. and my own unbroken devotion to the dreams I had once held in Atten box on the floor of my childhood home. The rain had begun hours before, a steady tapping against the roof that seemed to echo the slow, measured beat of my own heart. Each drop carried a memory, a reflection, a small pulse of the life that had once felt so secure. I sat alone in my small room, the walls bare, the air heavy with the scent of damp wood and cold morning light. Outside, the world continued in quiet rhythm, but inside, everything felt suspended, caught between the reality of what had been taken and the uncertainty of what remained. The tin box sat open on the table, hollow now, its silence louder than any word. I traced the edges with my fingertips, remembering the coins that had once filled it. The crumpled notes tucked carefully beneath the lining, the soft clink that had always brought a sense of progress, of hope. Each memory pressed against me, a gentle but relentless weight, and yet the box remained empty, a hollow reminder that effort alone could not always protect dreams. Nights had always been my companion, but now they were a mirror of the quiet despair that had begun to root itself in my chest. The rain fell in waves, the rhythm irregular, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, like the subtle ebb and flow of grief itself. I could hear the wind rattling the window pane, the faint hum of distant traffic, the occasional drip of water from the eaves, small, ordinary sounds that felt magnified in my isolation. They mirrored the loneliness that had settled deep inside, a cold, creeping companion that refused to be ignored. I held an old letter in my hands, edges yellowed and brittle, the ink faded with time. I had read it countless times, but now each word seemed heavier, laden with both nostalgia and sorrow. The handwriting reminded me of the days when hope had been simple, when love had been assumed to be steadfast, and when dreams had seemed attainable with patience and care. Now, each word carried the weight of absence, of something promised and quietly taken away. The photographs scattered across the small desk spoke silently of happier days. Faces frozen in moments of laughter, snapshots of family rituals, birthdays, and ordinary smiles, each image a reminder of a life that existed before the rupture, before the quiet betrayal of necessity. I lingered on them, fingertips brushing over edges, eyes tracing familiar contours, hearts etched in memory but altered in presence. Each photograph was a gentle sting, a reminder that love could endure, yet still leave behind echoes of longing. I thought of my sibling, of the tuition that had been prioritized over my own painstaking savings. It was not the money alone that cut deepest, but the realization that love and fairness do not always align. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a space of quiet judgment, each corner echoing with the weight of choices made and consequences endured. The walls whispered in tones of memory and absence, shadows stretching long across the floor, bending light into shapes that mirrored the ache inside me. Even daily tasks carried the sting of emptiness, cooking simple meals, arranging belongings, tending to small routines. They all felt heavier, as if each action reminded me of what had been lost. And yet, within that heaviness, there was a quiet resilience, an unspoken insistence that life must continue, even in silence. I found myself returning again and again, to the tin box, to the letters, to the photographs, each object a tether to the past, a bridge between the child I had been and the person I was becoming. I would sit for hours by the window, watching rain trace delicate paths down the glass, imagining them as rivers carrying away both sorrow and memory. Sometimes I allowed myself to speak quietly to the empty room, to the objects that remained, to the air itself. Words were not needed, but the act of forming them, even silently, brought a measure of solace, a recognition of the depth of feeling that had taken root. Grief, I realized, was not always loud. It could be as subtle as the sound of rain, as quiet as a room waiting for the sun. In those hours of quiet reflection, I began to recognize the layers of emotion intertwined in my heart. Anger sat beside love, sorrow beside longing, isolation beside memory. Each feeling was not separate but fused, a tapestry woven from the threads of experience, both tender and unrelenting. The tin box remained empty, but it became a symbol of endurance, a container not of coins or folded notes, but of patience, understanding. and the quiet acknowledgement of life's imperfections. The rain intensified, drumming steadily against the roof, echoing through the hollows of the room and the hollows of my own chest. I let myself feel the ache fully, each pulse of emotion a reminder that I was still alive, still capable of memory, still capable of hope, even when that hope had been reshaped by circumstance. Shadows of the past stretched and shifted with each passing hour, but within them, I began to glimpse faint outlines of resilience, of quiet strength hidden beneath layers of hurt. I imagined walking through the rooms of my childhood home, seeing everything in muted light, hearing echoes of conversations and laughter softened by time. The rain outside became a companion, a gentle witness to the quiet unfolding of sorrow and understanding. Each drop seemed to echo a memory, each ripple on the glass a reflection of feelings too delicate for words. The tin box, empty yet present, became a focal point, a reminder that even absence carries meaning, and that loss does not erase the essence of what was once cherished. By the end of the day, as the rain softened to a gentle drizzle and the sky turned a muted gray, I found a fragile peace settling over the room. The silence no longer felt entirely oppressive. It was a space to inhabit, to breathe, to reflect. The tin box rested quietly, the letters lay scattered, the photographs faced upward, silent witnesses to a day that had been marked by sorrow. Yes, but also by the quiet acknowledgement of endurance, memory, and the slow, patient pulse of the human heart. And in that silence, as the final drops fell and the soft wind whispered through the eaves, I realized that grief could coexist with reflection, that loss could coexist with tenderness, and that even in the emptiness of the tin box, a life of small, deliberate acts of love and hope continued to live, quietly, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The streets felt different now. I walked slowly, letting my footsteps fall where they may, tracing paths I had known as a child, now softened by time and quiet rain. Each corner held a shadow, a flicker of memory that lingered like a faint perfume, sweet, fleeting, and just out of reach. The houses, the trees, the uneven pavement, all carried whispers of a life once lived, of laughter and arguments, of small victories and overlooked sorrows. It was as if the past had never truly left, simply folded itself into the spaces around me, waiting for me to notice. I thought of my parents, of their hands and their voices, the subtle ways love had been offered and withdrawn. I remembered the warmth of early mornings, rice cooking on the stove, the clatter of dishes, the rhythm of small chores. And I thought of the choices they had made, the quiet ones that shaped the course of my life without apology or explanation. At first it had been anger that pulsed under my skin, raw and unyielding. But walking now, revisiting these shadows, I began to sense the texture of their humanity, fear, exhaustion, devotion tangled with misjudgment. Their love was imperfect, but it had existed, and it had left its mark. The tin box, now safely tucked into a drawer, seemed to hum in memory, carrying the echoes of each coin and note that had once lived within it. I remembered the small victories, the triumphs of patience and diligence, and even the disappointment that had followed when those efforts were quietly rerouted. Objects had a strange power, a letter, a photograph, a box of coins. They were vessels for memory, for understanding, for reconciliation. And as I moved through the quiet streets, the memories attached to them began to feel less like chains and more like threads, weaving a tapestry I was only now beginning to understand. I paused beneath a tree whose branches stretched low, leaves heavy with rain, and watched droplets gather and fall, tracing their paths to the soil below. They reminded me of tears I had not allowed myself to shed, of the quiet grief that had lingered in my chest for so long. I let the rhythm of the rain guide me, imagining it washing over old hurts, softening edges of anger and regret. Perhaps that was what memory was meant for, not to imprison, but to teach, to reveal the layers of love and failure that coexisted, delicate and often invisible. In the spaces between shadows and light, I noticed the small gestures that had shaped my understanding of family. A hand lingering on a shoulder, a whispered encouragement, the simple act of sharing a meal. These fragments of care, once overlooked in my anger, began to emerge with startling clarity. I realized that love does not always arrive perfectly wrapped. Sometimes it comes folded, frayed, and confusing, and yet it persists. In that persistence, I found the beginnings of empathy, a gentle acknowledgement that my parents had acted from their own fears, hopes, and limitations. The memory of my sibling surfaced next, not with anger or envy, but with the soft ache of understanding. I remembered moments of camaraderie, shared secrets, and laughter, alongside the quiet favoritism that had often left me on the periphery. In revisiting these memories, I began to see that life is not a ledger of fairness. People are not equal in need, and love does not always distribute itself evenly. And yet, within those imbalances, there was still connection, still the possibility of reconciliation, still the faint glimmer of tenderness that had persisted despite pain. The letters, once merely reminders of loss, now became vessels of insight. I unfolded them carefully, letting the edges curl in my hands, noticing the faded ink and the subtle pressure of the writer's pen. Each word seemed to breathe differently now, carrying not just expectation or disappointment, but also intention, hope, and fragility. I read them slowly, allowing the rhythm of the words to guide my heart, to illuminate the invisible contours of my parents' choices. The act of remembering became an act of empathy, a bridge between the child who had been wronged and the adult who was learning to forgive. Walking further, I came to the old park where I had once spent long afternoons counting coins and dreaming of a future that had felt impossibly distant. The swings hung still, their chains glinting with raindrops, the ground soft and sodden beneath my shoes. I sat on a bench, feeling the cool wood beneath my hands, and let the memories rise without resistance. The sound of rain, the faint scent of wet earth, the distant laughter of children playing, all merged into a tapestry of the past and present. I understood finally that memory was not a prison, but a landscape to be walked through, gently and deliberately, with awareness and grace. The shadows of memory, once heavy and suffocating, began to soften. I recognized patterns of care and neglect, love and oversight, sacrifice and oversight. I realized that my parents' actions, flawed though they were, had been shaped by fear and hope, by scarcity, and the desire to do what they believed was best. My anger, once sharp and immediate, now folded into quiet understanding, leaving room for tenderness to emerge. The journey through these shadows was not easy, but it was necessary, a step toward reclaiming the parts of myself that had been lost in disappointment and pain. By the time I rose from the bench, the rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle. The streets shimmered, reflecting the soft light of a late afternoon sky. Each step I took felt lighter, as though the act of walking through memory had loosened some of the weight I had carried for years. I felt the pulse of life returning, subtle but steady, a reminder that even amidst loss, the heart could expand, could hold both sorrow and gratitude, could recognize the beauty that exists alongside imperfection. Returning home, I gathered the letters and photographs that had guided me through the streets, the tangible echoes of memory that now carried not just sorrow, but also clarity. I placed them gently back in the tin box, a vessel not for coins, but for understanding, reflection, and quiet compassion. And as I closed the lid, I felt the shadows of memory settle around me like a soft cloak, comforting and familiar, reminding me that even in loss, there is room for connection, for recognition, for love that endures in subtle, gentle forms. The morning arrived soft and hesitant, sunlight spilling through the windows in golden slants that painted the walls with warmth and quiet invitation. I paused at the threshold, letting the light touch my hands, my face, as if it were an old friend welcoming me home. The house smelled faintly of wood polish and aged paper, a gentle mixture that stirred both memory and comfort. Here, in this stillness, the air itself seemed to carry an apology, or perhaps simply a recognition of the years that had passed, of all the waiting, all the quiet longing, all the fragile patience that had brought me to this moment. I moved slowly, my footsteps careful on the familiar floorboards, each creak speaking softly under my weight. The rooms held echoes of laughter, arguments, whispers, and quiet chores. The invisible fingerprints of life lived together. Sunlight streamed across the kitchen counter, glancing off the tin box resting there, now empty of coins, but heavy with meaning. I ran my fingers across its smooth lid, recalling the mornings spent dropping spare change inside, the careful tallying, the hopeful imagining of futures not yet written. And now, it carried a different weight, a vessel of reflection, of understanding, of gentle reconciliation. My parents were nearby, their presence unassuming but steady. The years had softened them, as they had softened me, and there was no need for grand gestures or dramatic words. A shared glance, the quiet touch of a hand, a nod across the room. These small acknowledgments carried the weight of everything left unsaid. The years of tension, of silent questioning, of imagined betrayals seemed to find a rhythm in these moments, not of confrontation, but of recognition. They were here, as I was, imperfect and human, and that alone was enough to begin a new chapter. I found myself lingering by the window, sunlight pooling around me like liquid warmth. Outside, the garden bloomed with resilience, flowers sprouting through cracks in the soil, leaves trembling in a gentle breeze. It was a quiet reminder that life endures, even when fragile, even when overlooked. I breathed in the scent of rain-damp earth and early blossoms, letting it fill the spaces where grief and anger had once settled. The house, the light, the subtle rhythm of domestic life, all of it felt like a bridge, connecting the pain of memory with the gentleness of presence. The tin box, once a symbol of disappointment, now seemed to embody possibility. I opened it carefully, letting sunlight spill across its edges, and thought of the letters, photographs, and keepsakes that had guided me through years of reflection. These objects, silent and patient, had witnessed my anger, my loneliness, my quiet steps toward understanding. Now they offered something more, a tangible record of growth, a gentle echo of resilience, a reminder that even fractured love could be acknowledged and honored without erasing its imperfections. I wandered through the rooms, letting my hands graze the surfaces, each touch a quiet meditation. The walls, the furniture, the faint creak of the stairs under my weight, all spoke of history, of ordinary life threaded with extraordinary moments of tenderness. I noticed the little details I had once overlooked. A photo of a younger sibling smiling with innocent pride, a hand-woven cloth draped over a chair, the faint fragrance of cooking that lingered long after meals ended. These were the fingerprints of love, subtle but persistent, revealing themselves only to those willing to look without judgment, willing to see beyond expectation. In the living room, sunlight fell across a well-worn armchair, highlighting the soft patterns of age and use. I settled there, letting the light warm my face. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of completion, not closure in the sense of erasing the past, but a quiet settling, a recognition that love and disappointment could coexist without shattering the heart. I let the memories of the tin box, the coins, the whispered promises wash over me with a gentle rhythm. Here in the golden light, I could carry them without burden, allowing them to be both a reminder and a release. I thought of my parents again, of the choices they had made, the compromises, the sacrifices, and the ways they had tried to navigate scarcity and expectation. The anger that had once seemed insurmountable now softened into understanding, a recognition that life is never fair, that love is often clumsy, and that even mistakes can carry intention and care. I saw them not as villains in my story, but as human beings doing the best they could with what they had. And in this realization, I felt a quiet shift, a subtle unburdening of my heart. The afternoon moved slowly, sunlight shifting and softening as it traveled across the walls. I watched it play over familiar surfaces, noticing the dust motes dancing in its path, the way shadows stretched and contracted like breathing. Life, in its unassuming persistence, continued, ordinary, tender, unremarkable, yet profoundly moving. I allowed myself to simply be, to inhabit the space without expectation, to let the presence of those I loved and those I had once resented settle side by side in my mind. It was a reconciliation not of words, but of heartbeats, of silences, of shared history. By evening, the light had mellowed, casting long, soft shadows across the floor. I lingered by the window once more, looking out at the garden now darkened and quiet, the faint rustle of leaves in the wind carrying the echo of the day. I felt the subtle pulse of peace, the gentle acknowledgement that imperfection does not preclude love, that disappointment does not erase care, and that time, however slow and uneven, has a way of teaching even the hardest lessons. The tin box rested quietly on the counter, a small monument to memory, to growth, to understanding. I realized then that reconciliation is not always a dramatic turning point or a spoken apology. Sometimes it is sunlight on old walls, the subtle recognition of presence, the soft acknowledgement of what has been and what endures. It is the act of noticing, of allowing the heart to soften, of holding memory and reality together without tearing either apart. In this gentle rhythm, I found a quiet home for my own heart, a place where love, loss, forgiveness, and remembrance could coexist without strain, without judgment, simply as they were meant to be. As night approached, the last rays of sunlight lingered, casting a golden glow that seemed almost to pause, as if honoring the journey that had brought me here. I sat with the warmth on my face, the quiet hum of the house around me, and allowed the stillness to settle deep inside. The shadows of memory had transformed into a landscape of understanding, the anger into empathy, the loneliness into acceptance. And in that transformation, I discovered something tender and enduring, the capacity to carry both the past and the present together, lightly, gently, with the quiet grace that comes from truly seeing and feeling. The house was still. The air held a softness that seemed almost sacred, a gentle pause after years of movement, expectation, and quiet unrest. I settled into a chair by the window, letting the fading light spill across the floor, pooling in golden slants that felt both familiar and new. Outside, the garden breathed with the last whispers of evening, leaves trembling in the cool breeze, petals curling gently toward the earth. It was in this quiet that I noticed the weight of time itself, how it had carried me through loss, through longing, through silent reflection, and now brought me here, to stillness, to presence, to the tender pause that follows reconciliation. The tin box sat nearby, resting as though it had grown too old for haste. Its edges caught the final rays of sunlight, worn and faded, yet dignified in its simplicity. It had held so much, not just coins, but dreams, frustrations, small victories, and quiet grief. I traced its surface with my fingertips, letting memory flood gently over me. The mornings of careful saving, the soft whispers of parents, the sudden emptiness, the nights of reflection. Each layer of memory settled like dust motes in the light, delicate, visible, and yet weightless, carried now only by the heart that remembered. I thought of all the silences that had filled the spaces between us, the words unspoken, the questions never asked, the longing that had once felt like a hollow ache. Those silences, once heavy with tension, now felt like bridges. They had led me through anger and confusion, through grief and resentment, to a quiet understanding that life rarely unfolds according to expectation. Theirs, mine, ours, all intertwined in imperfect harmony. In that realization, I found a gentle freedom. The knowledge that love could exist even when flawed. That forgiveness was not erasing the past, but holding it tenderly, as one holds a fragile object of beauty. I lingered by the window, watching shadows stretch and bend with the slow retreat of the sun. The room smelled faintly of aged wood, tea, and the lingering aroma of meals long past. The small domestic details, the creak of floorboards, the soft ticking of a clock, the rustle of curtains in the evening breeze, felt like quiet companions, witnesses to the life that had unfolded here. Each sound, each scent, seemed to whisper that the past need not weigh heavily anymore. It could simply be remembered, honored, and allowed to rest alongside the present. Memories drifted in softly. The laughter of a sibling, the careful hands of parents folding clothes, the clink of coins dropped into a tin box, the smell of rain against the pavement. They were fragments, tiny pieces of a larger story, scattered across years, and yet linked by invisible threads of love, hope, and human fallibility. I let them float through me, acknowledging both the pain and the tenderness, the disappointment and the care. There was no rush, no need to untangle every knot. The quiet itself became a sanctuary, a space where life's complexities could coexist without judgment. I closed my eyes for a moment, listening to the stillness. Perhaps some things never truly leave. They simply reside in the corners of memory, in the spaces between heartbeats, in the soft echo of everyday life. The tin box, the letters, the photographs, all remnants of a life lived with both clumsiness and care. And I realized in this gentle pause that the quiet that remains is not emptiness. It is presence. It is the slow, tender unfolding of understanding, of empathy, of gentle acceptance. It is the heartbeat of memory, softened by time and reflection, yet alive with resonance. As evening deepened, I allowed myself one last glance around the room. Sunlight had faded, leaving a warm twilight glow that seemed to linger in the corners, in the textures of the walls, in the stillness of objects. I breathed slowly, savoring the quiet, feeling the weight of years lift just enough to leave room for presence. The tin box rested, the letters lay folded, and the memories settled softly, like shadows draping themselves gently across the floor. It was a stillness that carried no judgment, no expectation, no urgency, only recognition, only tenderness, only the gentle heartbeat of life remembered and held. In that quiet, I felt the story settle, not as a conclusion written in words, but as a living, breathing rhythm of heart and memory. It was here that I understood. The quiet that remains is not absence. It is a space for love, reflection, and the subtle beauty of human imperfection. It is where we meet ourselves again, after all the waiting, all the longing, all the reflection. And in that meeting, there is peace, soft, enduring, and luminous, like sunlight lingering on old walls long after the day has passed.